We don't have enough aides. We don't have enough paraprofessional support. We don't have everything that we need to be able to fairly compete. So here we are.
And we're fighting for you and supporting you every step of the way.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're striking for our voices to be heard and to show people we really are about our children. That's what we're out here for. We know what their needs are. And in some communities that need those resources like counselors and social workers and materials and updated technology and, you know, all those things that we know our children need, the only way that anybody's going to understand what they need is if we stand out here and walk the line, because we do care about our children. That's why we're out here.
Whose students?
Our students.
Whose city?
Our city.
Whose choice? Rhyme's choice. Whose choice?
Welcome to the Michael Brooks Show. We're broadcasting live from Brooklyn, USA, where left is best as it is everywhere else, with super producer Matt Leck.
Good evening.
Chief economist David Griscom.
How's it going?
Super producer David Slavic in the digitosphere, in the ever-growing, ever-aggressive, ever-expanding TMBS universe. On this week's program, Nomiki Konst. She joins us. She is the candidate for New York City Public Advocate. She is our friend and comrade. She's running on a for real, no bullshit democratic socialist program. We're talking about going to war against Amazon and Wall Street, going to war for public housing, the Black Lives Matter agenda, and a still rampantly unaccountable police department in New York, plus the relationship between New York and the colonial occupied and exploited island nation of Puerto Rico, and an event that we are going to be doing with a bunch of other people for Nomiki this Thursday. We've got a global update. The woke paramilitary forces of Justin Trudeau's Canadian government are forcibly removing Native Canadians off of their land because they're protesting a oil pipeline. Hopefully they're using all of the appropriate terminology as they do that. We will expose the pseudo-woke neoliberal thug and his government in a global update. Tulsi Gabbard moves closer towards the presidency, but unfortunately there is an actual problem there that we're going to need to be real about. Peace talks in Yemen. Shoutout Rashida Talib. Griscom is coming through with an economics segment in the post game. We're going to do a live stream for the public. You can hang out with us. We're going to be playing the clown fascist announcement tonight, Bernie's response. Edward R. Murrow's going to give us some wisdom from the ages. And of course, we're going to deal with Tayyip Erdogan's announcement of essentially an ethnic cleansing program in Kurdistan in the New York Times. And Dave Rubin, what? Bosiro, SJWs, and people have to get into a gulag for disrespecting the great Angela Davis. All that and more on the Michael Brooks Show. But first, let's talk about strikes. Teachers in LA might be going on one in a couple of days if their demands for increased wages, smaller class sizes, and other essential needs aren't met. The district superintendent of Los Angeles, Austin Beutner, is a multimillionaire with Wall Street connections and has been planning on expanding charter schools in the region and funneling more money out of the public school system. He have also worked on for the State Department on Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union and was a part of the disastrous shock therapy privatization schemes pushed by U.S. corporate interests, Wall Street, and the World Bank, which plunged post-Soviet Russia into a orgy of corruption, poverty, mafia politics that set the stage for the resurgent authoritarianism of the Putin government today. So he's got an impressive record. Among the demands that teachers have is pay increases for teachers and class sizes, as well as more nurses, counselors, and librarians, the people that actually make up the holistic infrastructure of a full, actual, for real public education. The union has also demanded restrictions on charter schools and resisted the tyranny of standardized testing. So far, a deal has not been reached, and both the district and the union have spent today in court as the district is suing the union, claiming that they're not legally able to strike on Thursday as planned. If there is a delay, the strike will start on Monday, the 14th. There will be a meeting Wednesday morning, that is tomorrow from this evening, to see if it can be averted. And this fits into a much broader history, as you saw in that cold open, of the Chicago's teachers strike in 2012. And I think we need to actually put that in the continuum of a resurgent left in modern U.S. politics. There's the Occupy movement, essential, incredibly important. Black Lives Matter, the campaign of Bernie Sanders, and I would also add the Chicago teachers strike. They were resisting the, of course, particularly obscene, authoritarian, and anti-people leadership of Chicago mayor and former Obama chief of staff and NAFTA point man Rahm Emanuel. And they were resisting, though, some of the same things that you're seeing resisted in Los Angeles, which has to do with prioritizing charter schools and private education. Superintendent Beutner of Russia shock doctrine fame has called this charter school demands a distracting, quote-unquote, shiny ball in response to what the union president Alex Caputo said, "We know that there's going to be a compromise at the end of the day, but the big ticket items like class size, staffing, and limited standardized testing are pretty foundational, along with charter school accountability, without a doubt." Our current education secretary, Betsy DeVos, backed by the Mercers, Waltons, and Koch brothers and other malefactors of the country, has supported charter schools across the country. Charter schools are disasters for low-income students who see money and investment funneled away from public schools to charter schools and suffer the consequences. Additionally, charter schools and similar programs have sought to find ways to move money out of public schools and into religious schools. In Florida, tax credit schemes try to subvert a ban on public financing of religious schools by funneling money as a tax-free write-off through nonprofits to be used for religious schools. In the 2012 protest strikes, which you mentioned before, the first wave was a fight between the teachers and the pro-business forces supported by both Democrats and Republicans. Rahm Emanuel began laying the groundwork to increase the privatization of public education, along with teacher layoffs, and was supported in this effort by billionaires Bill Gates, the Walton family, and Eli Broad. The Chicago teachers went on strike for similar demands. As I've said before, this battle is ongoing and bipartisan and implicates many frontline Democrats. Public education has been under assault for decades, and democracy in chains. This is one of the areas that Nancy McLean points out as a sort of key resistance point of the American oligarchy to an emergent and broadened American democracy. And of course, if you're on the left, you would criticize stagnant models of education and authoritarian teaching and control and coercion of students. And indeed, in the 70s, there were radical, more sort of anarchist-style writers like Ivan Illich who critiqued schools as bureaucracies and called for greater radicalism. Paulo Freire in Brazil wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed and said that schools, instead of being sort of factories to churn people out as economic performers, needed to equip the poor to overturn the structures of their oppression, essentially, and to own their economies. So the stakes are big across all parts of this debate. But it has been the case that starting with the far right and bleeding through the corporate consensus and into the elites of the Democratic Party, that the very notion of public education has been under assault. And charter schools have been a major sort of battering ram of this fight. They have emerged as a distinctly neoliberal way of dealing with the crisis. Let's save a few students while we undercut the totality of the quality. In many cases, also, charter schools have been exposed for lying about performance, distorting test results, and underserving students who need the most help. President Obama was a supporter of charter schools, saying only our children only get one chance at education, and charter schools demonstrate what is possible when states, communities, teachers, parents, and students work together. Of course, states, students, teachers, and communities working together is literally the point of public education, not private, profit-seeking, narrow interests undermining the collective enterprise. Charter schools have just been a way to privatize public money and take it away from public education. And let's get really specific about this. Hedge funds and banks have invested in charter schools and enjoy significant tax credits. Even more bizarrely, foreign investors who donate a maximum of $500 into charter schools have been allowed to buy immigration visas for themselves or their family members under EB-5 program. The real estate industry also benefits from renting or selling to the public charter schools. Much of the rhetoric around charter schools is anti-labor and essentially blames teachers. That's right. Teachers, people making maybe $60,000 a year or less, to educate classrooms full of children in dilapidated schools and under-sourced resources. It's their fault that kids are underperforming, not structural inequality, not lack of investment, not oligarchy. Teachers. Charter schools have also had a disproportionately negative effect on people and students of color. The working class demand for public education is elemental to the radical democratic and socialist project from the beginning. Working people understood the importance of a public education system, which is why the defense and expansion of public schools were a central demand of the American working class movement. Here's a call from the Philadelphia Working Men's Association in the 19th century requesting the realization of public education for all classes. The original element of nepotism is a monopoly of talent, which consigns the multitude to comparative ignorance and secures the balance of knowledge on the side of the rich and the rulers. The means of equal knowledge, the only security for equal liberty, should be rendered by legal obligation the common property of all classes. The right to an education is a fight over the means to have a prosperous life, regardless of where you come from, and engage in a democracy across all sectors of society. Public education is an important victory for democracy in the working class, and this is why it's been threatened by the ruling class. From racial segregation schemes to denying the funding to the ruling class is always on the offensive to roll back this important gain and value. But we cannot be satisfied with just defeating the onslaught of the rich. We need a principled and bold stand for fighting for the realization and promise of free, exceptional public education for all. Folks, of course, I skipped out on all that shit as a homeschooler. I fucking crushed it. But there was actually a lot of Ivan Illich and Paulo Freire. See, people think of there's three different types of people who get homeschooled from parents, right? There's people know the religious types. Then there's actually people who don't necessarily have the financial resources, but figure out a way to have the time to be there and just want their kids to go to Harvard and just drill them academically. And then there was a contingent of people who were like, I don't want my kid to be trained to go into the war machine, man. And I was part of that group. Also, I was a massive behavioral problem and almost certainly would have been expelled from school if I could tell on myself.
Well, it's because you had a one-to-one system then at home,
dude.
right?
Oh, yeah. Dude, I went to, I mean,
What,
I was very provocative. That's how I'll put it.
I'll tell you, this potential strike in Los Angeles is so needed, though. When you look at just the class sizes alone, I mean, we're talking about average class sizes that are, above 25 students per class. In some middle schools and high schools, it is even creeping up into the 40s, the low 40s,
Right.
which is just unbelievable. Imagine having to sit in a room and control 40 teenagers.
And then having all of society tell you that it's your fault.
Exactly.
That is the greatest. I remember going to see, I watched Waiting for Superman, which is already very dated, but during the Obama administration, that was one of the prime pieces of propaganda for charter schools. And that was very much also like a movie of the Democratic and Hollywood establishment. And, I was just out of college, and I was doing some advertising work and stuff like that. And my girlfriend at the time was in graduate school for public policy at Columbia. So I went to go see this movie with a group of people that were being trained to be policymakers. And at a very, very well-placed institution, obviously. And we got out of the movie, and the rest of them were just buzzing of like, oh my God, this is so amazing, but it's also so upsetting. And there was a stat in the movie that they hung their hat on, which was like, it's not that if you're rich that the school is better. It's that the better school makes a community rich. So in other words, like Scarsdale just popped up around an awesome elementary school, essentially. And then like, I don't know, Brownsville is just like, those fucking teachers, they really created all of the racism, lack of economic opportunity, like all of that. And I was the only one. And at this point, I underline this because at this point in my life, I wasn't doing this work. I wasn't in graduate school for public policy. I had no relationship to any of this stuff. And I was the only one who said, no one else was a little bit. I wasn't even that aggressive about it. I was like, none of you guys thought it was a little fishy, the whole like money to school relationship? Oh, yeah. And then they're like, oh, yeah, maybe.
Correlation is not causation, buddy.
All right.
Or the fact that in that movie, the whole spectacle of having the children stand in like the auditorium and hope that their name is called.
That was
disgusting.
Disgusting.
And when you look
it played like we were watching Rocky versus some of the most like fucking I can't even think of what.
And when you look into the actual activities
of
a lot
shit.
of 100% Hunger Games shit, and like when you look into a lot of the activities of charter schools, it's pretty incredible to see a lot of the illegal activities that they participate in to make sure that their their classes are more white and more well off, including expelling kids.
Yep.
Black brown kids are expelled from charter schools at very high rates, and that's not an accident. And it's one of those things where it's like you're looking at this system, which is really just taking money out of a system that desperately needs it to basically create smaller segregated schools for rich kids to go to who don't want to, whose parents don't want them to have to go to these public schools. It's pretty frustrating to watch.
Yep.
This reminds me of the whole Bill Gates Foundation spent $500 million on education and got zero measurable results. This is from John Thompson, and I don't know exactly his background, but he looks to be a fairly good education policy writer. He wrote, the Gates education policy was based on the hunches of economists who use a lot of sophisticated tools that were invented by social scientists. But these true believers in big data adopted methodologies that were inappropriate for guiding school policy and dismissive of or ignorant about peer-reviewed education and cognitive science research. Neither were they shy about their contempt for education practitioners. And then this is from the Washington Post. It goes into why didn't this work. This is from their own report, Improving Teacher Effectiveness, final report. They say, however, if the findings of no effect are valid, the results might reflect a lack of successful models on which sites could draw in implementing the levers, and then problems in making use of teacher evaluation measures to inform key HR decisions, the influence of state and local context, or insufficient attention to factors other than teaching quality.
Yeah, I would have. Right.
And Bill Gates, this is capitalism, the capitalist initiatives for you.
Yeah,
precisely.
And just to hit this point home one more time, a public education is such an important socialistic ideal because it is the idea that as a community, as a society, we want to have an educated people. It doesn't matter if you don't have any children. It doesn't matter if your children are past the age of education. You want to make sure that the next generation is educated. And since we have gotten that in place in the society, there have been people who have been trying to tear that down because they understand that access to education is access to power. And it's something that, is a very important thing for the left to take absolutely seriously. And it's exciting to see all the mobilization that we've seen over the past few years. And obviously there's been people who've been fighting about it for decades to make sure that we don't lose this fundamental right and to expand it to make it better for everybody.
Absolutely. All right. Let's get to the shout out. And I promise, I know some people have been bitching that I've been talking over a DJ Danarchy song. I won't.
Shout out. Weird. I think that's creepy. It's incredible. Shout out. This is crazy. Shout out. This is out of control. Shout out. That's creepy. Shout out. That's weird. Creepy. Weird. Crazy. Shout out. This is crazy. Shout out. This is out of control. This is weird. Shout out.
The great DJ Danarchy. Everybody's seen this by now, but it's fun. Let's watch it again. Yes.
People love you and you win. Woo! And when your son looks at you and says, Mama, look, you won, bullies don't win. And I said, baby, they don't. Because we're going to go in there, we're going to impeach the motherfucker.
Just a gift to Republicans.
Yeah, just, is this really what we need? The smell of salt. Well, that's why we use this. So one, I've been very politically skeptical about impeachment because the Republicans will obviously never remove Trump because he has a mind and heart meld with their base and with them, all of their leadership as well. There's no daylight there. But now I'm convinced we should impeach the motherfucker because the argument was made in terms that I can understand by an effective political communicator. Secondly, and we don't even have time to go down this whole rabbit hole of just the sort of pedant, mind-numbing, concern troll, fucking wuss pusswad stupidity of David Axelrod and various other weenie, beyond mediocre pundits whose just complete emotional, moral, intellectual mediocrity and timidity is going to get us all killed if we don't studiously ignore everything they say, including their tone policing and whining and snowflakery around Rashida Talib's awesome call to impeach the motherfucker. Yes, I wish that Mark Potkan and Ruhalva and Rashida Talib and Ilhan Omar and Pramila Jayapal, other good Congress people, had voted against PAYGO. I understand their political calculation. This isn't the end of the world, but it is a reminder that we need to push the hell out of all of them and stay aggressive even on good people. But that said, that was fucking awesome. And let's get to it. I love it.
Just one note on the concern trolling about, is this the way to talk about impeachment? It
Yes.
doesn't. This is a serious issue. Shouldn't we treat it with more gravity? Every one of the reporters that said that didn't look into the fact that she's actually outlined this very explicitly in the Detroit Free Press on January 3rd. Nobody mentioned that.
Nobody
was having
mentions
that
it.
critique.
Exactly.
But she did. She's gone through this. She's actually has been serious about it. And guess what? The anger is justified. Fuck Trump.
Yeah, of course. The children are dying in captivity because of this bloated, brain dead, racist motherfucker. Well, if you don't have some rage, you're either a bad person or you're completely cut off from any moral imagination or energy. And I don't know, you're doing something like, I don't know, let me just think of a random example. If you are not embracing Rashida Talib's call to impeach the motherfucker, let me do a Jeff Foxworthy. You might be doing a master's class in political consulting with Karl Rove, which is what David Axelrod is doing. Get the fuck out of here. Stop it. Jesus Christ. It's embarrassing that I even need to speak about this, frankly. All right, let's do the pitch here. First, as always, look, we don't have much time because we got to get to Nomiki, but it's time to become a patron today. We have a buddy in studio, patron. How you doing, man? Thanks for being here. Guys, as you know, we're pretty close now. We're very close on the horizon now to that 2,000 patron goal. and that's really significant. And there's 2-to-1 content in illicit histories, theory readings, post games, a vibrant, active Discord community, all sorts of ways calling us. There's just a myriad of ways. At 21 and above, we just did another group call. We had actually a person on the group call who owns Jordan in Ohio owns a donut shop, which he's going to be working towards turning into a workers' cooperative in the future. Always fascinating people. It's an amazing community, and it helps sustain and expand what we do. Join today, patreon.com/TMBS. If you're watching on YouTube, first and foremost, you should become a patron. That's first and foremost. And if you are a patron, don't worry about what I'm about to say. But I think the people who are manually reviewing us on YouTube might be they might be like, hey, I like Dave Rubin. Because there's some unbelievably bizarre bullshit going on with us not being monetized. And I can just tell you, they're opaque. They don't really explain why. As far as the objective analytics, we've more than quadruple. We're infinitely past all of their requirements in terms of subscribers and hours of views. Actually, we're starting to do pretty well on YouTube. So here's what it is. Look, it's good for the show because it exposes more people to the show. But we also, there's obviously a lot of great left YouTube channels. I won't start naming all of them because I'll miss some. But that being said, YouTube is still dominated by the far right. And we want to be in the game doing our own distinct contribution to it. So, but we need to, at the very least, we want to bring in new revenue from it. Of course, that's the goal. But at the very least, we need to make it cost neutral because we're losing money on it. And we choose to keep doing it both to some extent to promote the show, but honestly, mostly just because we want to be in the mix on YouTube because it can become such a toxic environment. So there's a link in the description to a PayPal link for TMBS TV. Just go there and hit us up on PayPal with whatever. Could be a few people have done it already. It's been everything from, $3 to $20. Everything
also,
helps.
Shout out Forrest, who's doing a lot of good work on YouTube.
Shout out Forrest. Yes. And Forrest, who obviously is our YouTube guy, and we're very happy to hire, and he's doing awesome work for us. And at the very least, let's get everything taken care of with that. This Thursday, if you're in New York City, go at 7 p.m. to Chelsea Music Hall. That's on. Do we have that up on screen? Okay. Chelsea Music Hall. That's at 407 West 15th Street. It's a fundraiser for Nomiki Konst, who is running for, we're going to talk to her in a second, she's running for New York City Public Advocate as an unabashed, for real, no bullshit democratic socialist with incredible plans on public housing, on taxing oligarchs, on democratizing the city. Crush Club is going to be there and other great musicians. At 8 p.m., I will be in a Italian suit giving a 5-minute or 10-minute speech on behalf of Nomiki. So I will be there as well. If you want to come see me, I'd recommend everybody who's in town come see that show. The suggested donation is $27, and because of city matching funds in New York, $27 turns into $250. So now is the time to pump a huge amount of money into Nomiki's campaign and make her New York City Public Advocate. Then, of course, the last thing before we get to Nomiki is the Bell House. We're more than halfway sold out. Mike Racine and I just recorded guided meditations. We're working on guided meditations by Dave Rubin and Ben Shapiro. Dave Shapiro.
Sounds very easy to get lost in your sort of
you just deal with all
space.
of these disgusting people.
Breathe in, breathe out, ideas.
Yeah, breathe in, breathe out. Ooh, a dog.
Ideas.
What's that?
Free thought.
There's free thought. Ooh.
Muslims are bad.
Muslims are bad. Look, if you're not getting relaxed, that's because of your own inability to do the technique.
Can you imagine trying to meditate with that voice? What are we even doing? We're just sitting here.
Yeah. We're going to do, and of course, we already know, Trevor is going to be there. Trevor Beaulieu, the great Trevor Beaulieu, the great Ilona Mikovsky, the great Bhaskar Sunkara, and Mike Racine. Of course, all the rest of us. Go get your tickets. We're more than halfway sold out. So who knows? People tell me they start going again fast. So do it sooner than later. we'll see you at the Bell House. Do we want to play this clip of Nomiki?
This is Nomiki going off at the DNC Unity Reform Commission, just to get an idea of what she's like as spokesperson.
So you want to play that while we call her? Play that
Yeah,
for
I
the
think
break?
so.
Is
Yeah.
that like 2 minutes?
Yeah, just
Okay,
about,
perfect.
yeah.
That works perfectly. All right, yeah, throw that on, and we'll be back with Nomiki Konst.
All right.
For the people who have a fiduciary responsibility, whether it's Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, whether it's Donna Brazile when she was chair, when she was vice chair, or Vice Chair Ray Buckley, or Dr. Jim Zogby over here. That's over half the executive committee right there, had no idea where the money was going. We spent $1 billion, lost the easiest presidential race you could possibly imagine, with joint fundraising agreements. State parties weren't being funded. During the DNC chairs race, there were some state party chairs who said, I'm an acting executive director and I have $3,000 cash on hand. How are you supposed to rebuild the party if you have no idea where that money was spent? And you know what? I did go through FEC filings, and it doesn't look good. It smells. We're talking about close to $700 to $800 million between the joint fundraising agreement and the DNC being spent on 5 consultants. This is not a public outrage issue. The DNC chairs are upset, the officers are upset, and I don't know who's on the budget and finance committee. I did go to the meeting. It was 15 minutes long, and there was a pie chart that was put on screen. But I would, as a Democratic Party member of this commission, we have a duty, and people are watching us right now. The number one issue I get asked out in the public by DNC members is, what are you going to do about the budget? It is absolutely ridiculous that we are going to keep a status quo system when it basically says we're going to continue to lose 1,200 seats. Let me describe what losing 1,200 seats looks like, or the remaining seats we have. If you're in Trump, yes, but let's break that down a little bit. If you're in Arizona and you have an ectopic pregnancy, you can't go to a Planned Parenthood clinic because it's gone, because that state legislature is lost. So you have to drive over to New Mexico. And if you bleed to death on the way, you know whose fault that is? In my mind, that's a Democratic Party that wasn't funded, recruiting candidates, investing in local parties. And that is our fault, because we have put that money to the top 5 consultants. And part of that has to go to the conflicts of interests. This is outrageous, it's unethical, it's bad governance, and frankly, it's fucking, corruption.
Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Joining us now is that very same leader from the clip we just played, Nomiki Konst. Nomiki, how you doing?
Hi, that very same leader.
That very same leader. How you like that? There's some gravitas to the intros now.
Who knew an F-bomb would give me such notoriety on the Michael Brooks Show?
Well, actually, I think a lot of people probably could have predicted that. But yeah, Rashida Talib, I'm basically just a sucker for people who swear. Yeah.
That's right. When it's authentic, when it's not like when Tom Perez did that whole F-bomb and Kirsten Gillibrand did, it's like they take these things like, this is what the authentic people do, and we're just gonna weave it into our perfectly constructed candidate and hope that works.
So I don't have any time for Gillibrand. I just don't buy it in any way, shape, or form. With Perez, as much as he sucks, I found you know why? Because he swears in the same, he just seems so burdened by everything all the time. So the way he even was like, they don't give a fuck. I was like, oh man, Tom, he needs a hug. I kind of vibed it when he said that. I was like, poor Tom. Look at him trying to get out there and swear. Good for him. Yeah.
I have less patience for him because now that I'm not on the DNC Reform Commission, I can show my true colors.
Are you saying that Tom Perez doesn't give a fuck about us? Is that what you're trying to say, Nomiki?
I think he's fucking burdened by the consultants who are telling him what to do and how to act.
That is clear. That is one of the most burdened human beings I've ever seen in the national stage. Nomiki, we're going to talk about all the incredible things that you're going to do for New York City as our public advocate. We need to get you elected. But I already talked about what we're doing on Thursday. But tell the people even more about why they should come hang out with you and the musicians and me and everybody on Thursday at the music hall at 7 p.m.?
So we have this event that is taking place on Thursday, January 10th. Why that date is really important is we are in a special election. It's the first citywide special election ever in New York. And the timing of it is just so weird because it's right after the November elections and after the holidays. And then just after the New Year, Tish James was sworn in as Attorney General. And the day she was sworn in, there was a proclamation that this office would, this election would happen on February 26th. Mm-hmm. So immediately after that, all the candidates went right into gathering petition signatures and raising money for the first campaign matching funds deadline, which is on January 11th. So this week, we are in this like frantic space where, I mean, I'm sitting in the office right now and people are coming in and out. So if there's some background noise, I apologize, because we have volunteers who are out on the streets getting signatures, who are talking to voters. And you know, I've been doing all I can to raise money off of small dollar donations so that we can eventually qualify for the New York City Matching Funds Program, which is wonderful in theory, but in actuality, it's imperfect. You know, it's the new formula is every dollar that's raised in New York City under $250 receives another $8. So it's an 8-to-1 program. So if you raise $1, you get $9. If you raise $10, you get $90. And that's what we're trying to do at this event is get as many people as possible to throw in what they can. If they're from New York City, obviously, if you can give up to $250, that would be huge because what we're up against is candidates who have elected officials lined up making phone calls and just asking New Yorkers for $250 checks. We are proud to say that at this point we have 1,500 or more small dollar donations. That is probably, I would guess we're probably the only ones in the race who have that. But, you know, we're fighting a machine that has found every loophole to accept corporate money or real estate money, and we are not taking real estate money, corporate money, lobbyist money, PAC money, charter school money, none of the bad money, and we're not using loopholes people use to accept money. It's all honest people, honest working people in New York. So this event is an opportunity. We're so grateful to have people like yourself, Michael, and we have a couple of musicians, including DJ Tommy Sunshine, who is a world-famous DJ, but he was also a big Bernie Sanders surrogate. Yep. And then, you know, it's for me, Tommy has been incredible because I see him at every protest, and he's just so humble, and he's so honest, and he's so engaged. So it's so great that he's shown up for us multiple times, actually. And, you know, he's just like no drama. He's great. And then we have Crush Club, which is a New York-based band that's been getting a lot of buzz lately, and they're going to be playing a set, and I think we have another announcement pretty soon. I don't know if it's public yet, but yeah, so it's you know, it's evolving. It's a fun concert. We're going to have a lot of our volunteers there, a lot of our, you know, previous supporters, and of course, if you can make it out, if you want to learn about our campaign, I urge you to come. It's not just exclusive to New York City voters, so if you want to come and check us out and give, you know, we'll accept the money because it helps pay for organizers.
No doubt. Come. Yeah. If you are in the tri-state area, come hang out with us. Come help us get the person we need elected to be New York City public advocate. Now, Nomiki, give me a two-parter here. One, we remind everybody what the New York public advocate position is, and then what's your agenda for how to use this office for democratic socialism, justice, and broad democracy in New York City?
So this position is unique. It's really unique to New York, and it's a little over 25 years old. This position came out of a slew of corruption scandals in the late 80s that related to the real estate industry. And, you know, what I see this position as, and having researched the intent of the office, is it is a check on city government, on the mayor's office, the city council, all the city agencies, but also on special interests and political machines. This city has a long history from Tammany Hall of political machines corrupting our political processes, and now there's actual corruption, financial corruption. There's also legalized corruption.
Yep.
And the public advocate is there to be the watchdog of the city. I think it's been a great voice for the people of New York, but frankly, we have, and this is something that I think makes me unique from most of the pack that's running. This income inequality in New York is worse than anywhere else in the country. Yet we generate more wealth than anywhere on the planet. Income inequality in this country is the worst than any other moment in history, including the Wall Street collapse in 1929. We have unlivable wages here, even with the $15 minimum wage. Nobody in America, not one person, can afford a one-bedroom apartment on $15 an hour. We sure as hell can't do that here in New York City. People are being illegally evicted. You have NYCHA that's crumbling and is underfunded. 1 in 8 New Yorkers live in NYCHA. It's almost the size of Boston. They're dealing with, a lead poisoning crisis, leaky roofs, mold, asthma issues, no hot water, no heat. I mean, the list goes on and on about NYCHA. And then you have an MTA that's
Real quick, Nomiki, what does NYCHA stand for people who might not know?
I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's the public housing here in New York City. It's the New York City Housing Authority. That's literally what it stands for, NYCHA. But it's the public housing here.
Yep.
And it's, this is a city where it's really all over the world, but real estate has determined what is prioritized in the city. And there are, folks of all different backgrounds, all socioeconomic backgrounds, who have been evicted from their homes because you have developers who come in, they fix things up, they find a little flaw, they use these loopholes in the real estate laws to evict people, and then they redevelop. And every single city official in New York City has accepted some form of real estate money. It's not through corporations usually. It's usually like a developer's CEO and his sister and his wife and his brother and his cousin and his sons, and the whole family donates the limits.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, you have multiple city council members in my own race, that have rezoned their neighborhoods and then say that they're tenants activists. You cannot be a tenants' rights activist and accept real estate money. You cannot be a tenants' rights activist and rezone your own neighborhood. And that is what is making this city unaffordable, unlivable, and it's really, it's tearing apart the fabric of New York. I moved to New York to find my path. And I think so many New Yorkers identify with that. My grandfather literally arrived on the very last boat into Ellis Island, and he was escaping a hit list. He lived under a dictator who he escaped because the dictator put him on a hit list, a kill list, and he had to escape within hours because my grandfather challenged corruption. And, he came here for a purpose. And here we are, just a couple of generations later, and, the corruption level in New York it hasn't gotten better. I mean, there's legalized corruption, there's actual corruption. So I think that this position in particular needs somebody who has an investigative eye, who has the training to go after public officials, to follow the money, to call out conflicts of interest, and to really push back in a very, very hard way.
100%. And, Bill de Blasio today just announced something on healthcare for everybody in the city, including undocumented people. And I'm always willing to give people props when they do the right thing, and we'll see how that actually plays out. That being said, specifically, real estate and the structural problem of this industry in New York City, it goes to the center of why the de Blasio project has been such a problem in so many ways. And you just need somebody who's completely out of it. And it doesn't matter, plenty of politicians in New York City can, quote the right historical figures and hate Trump and, tip their hat and signify in this and that way. But the bottom line is, just like you said, if you're taking real estate money, you're the enemy of the people of this city, period, across the board. On top of that, I want to talk about how you respond to this Amazon scam.
So, I live in Queens. I live in Astoria, but technically, I live in Long Island City. They're very close. And that's where the Amazon headquarters is going to end up. A lot of public officials signed a letter, including some of whom I'm running against in this race. They signed a letter inviting Amazon to explore setting up their headquarters here. And it's interesting because, this was part of the public debate a couple of weeks ago in one of our forums, and the responses from these elected officials was, "Oh, well, I didn't actually sign the letter to invite them. I was just opening up a conversation." Well, first off, the first sentence of the letter was, "We as an elected body urge Amazon to invest in New York City." So that's bullshit. Second, it's not, the excuse they're making now, the public, and I'm glad that some of these people have been, strong opponents to Amazon since then. But the excuse that they have is not that Amazon's a bad company. What they're saying is this deal was happening behind closed doors. They didn't go to the communities first. We have these laws in the city where you have to go to communities first. Now, that's true, and that's corrupt, and that's against the law. But aside from that, this is actually what identifies the difference between a progressive and a good government person. It's not just a good government issue. We knew what Amazon was. We knew that Amazon, created a homeless crisis in Seattle.
Right.
We knew that Amazon has already killed thousands of businesses in this city that were small businesses. I mean, I literally walked by, I almost threw up the other day. I walked by an Amazon bookstore in New York, in Manhattan, that used to be, and this is why it's really weird, used to be a Barnes & Noble.
Yep.
And if you remember Barnes & Noble, all the small
they used to be the villains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Yeah.
what level of villain are you?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
So this is a company that doesn't just exploit workers, but they've shut down so many small businesses. They've lied during their deals. They lied in their, they cut a deal in Austin, Texas, and now the Austin City Council is suing Amazon to get their incentives back. Now, to add to all of this, now this is why it's a real estate issue. As public advocate, you're supposed to hold city council accountable. So I'm going to actually hold some of these members accountable. We have a council member named Jimmy Van Bramer. Now, he is against the Amazon deal now, and I commend him for that. But he was actively involved in the rezoning of that neighborhood. And what led to right after the rezoning, what happened was there were all these apartment complexes that got built. And who were the first to be sold apartments? Amazon employees. And this is way before the deal was even being negotiated. So what an intelligent public advocate should be able to do, somebody who has an investigative eye, is to be able to understand the data of the city. Suddenly you see, oh, that's weird. 150 Amazon employees just bought apartments in brand new apartment buildings in one location area. Like, I wonder what's going on there. So it's, yeah. And so he can't say that he didn't know this was happening.
Right.
And so it's not just him. I don't want to just focus on him because he's a decent guy, but this is ultimately the issue with the city council. The city council is progressive. Most of the city council is progressive on 85 to 90% of issues. But at the end of the day, it's that 10%. It's that 10% of real estate money. It's those deals. It's the rezonings. It's the economic development that is making this city so unaffordable. So you can say you're going to fight for, more funding to NYCHA, or you're going to fight for a better MTA, but, the people who are on the board of the MTA are real estate developers who don't even live in our city. So until you're willing to take on real estate, it's really inconsequential. I mean, all of it's just fluff, which is why I think that this office in particular should be independent from politics. The position is second to the mayor, and I think that's a design flaw. I think it's a serious design flaw, and on day one, if I were elected, I would call for a charter revision so that the person who's second to the mayor would be the Speaker of the City Council, because that's how it usually works, and that the public advocate would actually be independent, so you don't have these political games where folks are looking for their next jobs or a stepping stone.
Right. There's a couple of other things I want to hit on with you before you go, so can you take a few more minutes with us?
Of course.
Awesome. And again, come see us Thursday night at 7 p.m. at the Chelsea Music Hall. That's on 407 West 15th Street with Crush Club, The Oceans, a whole bunch of other amazing performers. Of course, Nomiki, of course, a whole bunch of great people. I'll be there giving a little bit of a talk or a speech.
You're going to be a host.
I'm going to be a host, exactly. All of it. It's going to be great, and we need to get Nomiki in this office. And, of course, we'll also tweet out the website where you can also do this contribution on as well, so we can get those 8-to-1 matching funds. What about your role in terms of policing and racial issues in this city, right? Like there's the gentrification, I think it's really important. Like it isn't just like some sort of, it's not, we talked about this last week, it's not some sort of cultural process of people having bad manners. It's an economic, almost colonization process driven by real estate that gets people out of their homes. And then on the and then in concert with that, going back to the Giuliani era, and of course before, but it's using police, particularly in certain areas, in incredibly aggressive ways on, obviously primarily communities of color, in concert with how the city's governed, how the experience of this city completely shifts depending on, what area you're in and, frankly, what you look like. There's been some modest reforms under de Blasio, but there's still a lot of people that experience, frankly, NYPD in a way that they shouldn't experience. And again, this isn't about individual NYPD officers. It's not a morality tale. It's a policy driven by numbers that is class and race driven, and therefore has and continues to have these abusive, pernicious effects. That's my little spiel on it. But what do you kind of see your role as a public advocate with regards to those issues as well?
Yeah, I think okay, sure. It's pushing for community policing is a tremendous step. Ending broken windows policy is a tremendous step. But there are some. I'll get to de Blasio in a second, but just recently, this is outrageous that this would even be suggested in 2018 when it was suggested. The new MTA chair is known for revolutionizing transportation. The MTA lacks the funds. I mean, I could tell you where you could find the funds, but we'll get that's again goes back to taxes and who's the real estate companies and the developers aren't paying taxes, and neither are big corporations, and so they want to put the burden on everyday people. But what they're proposing is a criminal justice issue. They're proposing that fare evaders are fined and possibly convicted. Now, this is an issue. I mean, the people who are jumping turnstiles are not jumping because it's fun. They're jumping because they can't afford $250 or $275 or whatever a weekly fare, or it's a child, or it's a teenager, or it's a mother, or I've been there. I have a personal story where I was actually pulled by the police. It's happened a couple of times. One time I actually didn't have any money. I was very broke living in the city, and it was a horrible time of my life, and I ran out of money and I wasn't getting paid for a couple of days, and I jumped, and I was pulled by the police. And sure enough, they let me off because I'm not a person of color. I'm a woman, and without a doubt, that's why. And then recently there was a machine that was broken, and so I jumped it because it was driving me crazy. And then this undercover cop pulled me aside, and I said, the machine's. But he was so combative with me. I was like, go to the turnstile and you will see. And he was like, well, I need to check and see if you have money on your card. I'm like, it's an unlimited weekly. So these are the issues. I mean, that's how they're going to get the fund. That's not how they're going to find the funding for the MTA. That is a criminal justice issue. Closing Rikers is a tremendous step, but there's a lot of controversy over what happens afterwards. Where do the legitimate where do you house? First thing, we should end cash bail so we don't have a Rikers issue.
Right,
but those who are actually who are sitting and need to be housed. There's a lot of controversy over these jails being set up in different boroughs and different communities. But when it comes to de Blasio, we need to reform the CCRB. This is outrageous at this point that you have policemen who forget about the fact that they should be held, they should be prosecuted for violent acts or worse, murder. These are policemen who aren't even being fired and still retain benefits and are put on leave, possibly put on leave or relocated. I cannot understand how Daniel Pantaleo, how is this man how does he still have a job? How has he not been convicted? How has he not been to trial when there's footage? This is outrageous that a progressive mayor is not willing to stand up to the police union. You know, there is compromise, but that is not compromise. We are willing to compromise with unions over all these different issues like salaries and wages and workers' benefits. You know, we find ways to, quote, compromise with the unions as a negotiation between big businesses and the unions, including Amazon. Yet, when it comes to the deaths of unarmed black men in this city and women, we don't have room to compromise. And I find that as an injustice, and I think as a mayor who ran on a tale of two cities and spoke to communities of color in particular, it is inhumane that we have not found a way to reform the CCRB.
100%.
And I would push for that.
100%. So, two last things. One, I want to connect Puerto Rico with just the sort of like global role of New York City. But so let me just say,
do you have 2 hours?
Sorry? Yeah.
Do you have 2 hours?
I do. You're going to come when you win this fucking thing. You're going to come in studio and we will.
I love it.
We'll outline the agenda. But
I love it.
I know you've done a lot of great work on Puerto Rico, and we've also, the last time you were on, we actually talked about Puerto Rico, and we talked about Nelson Dennis, I believe his name is, a great journalist. War Against All Puerto Ricans. That's a great book everybody should read. But specifically, there is this New York-Puerto Rico relationship, and it's another kind of classic example of a lot of politicians in the city are very, they know what time, they know what parade to show up to. They know how to kind of signify. Right. Meanwhile, if they're taking money from some of the same Wall Street and hedge fund interests that are in the next stage of robbing this colony blind, just specifically, what's the role that you see for yourself and drawing light on that New York to Puerto Rico relationship?
It's a little wonky and, in terms of understanding how machines in New York City work. Mm-hmm. But essentially, you have a situation in New York where you have the bondholders who are holding the debt in Puerto Rico, and they're setting the terms. You have Promesa, which is there's this fiscal board that has been determining the austerity of the island. I mean, the island is under austerity, and not only is it under austerity, but meanwhile, it is twice as poor as Mississippi, which is our poorest state. It is, Puerto Rican citizens, I say Puerto Rican citizens or U.S. citizens, but they self-identify usually as Puerto Rican citizens. That's not me being, that's just, you go to the island, you'll get that right away. We are Puerto Ricans, and yep. People say it's our country, so there's a strong independence movement there, or in the culture at least. But they will say, they're being taxed on goods coming in and goods going out. So I live in New York. I go to Puerto Rico, and the cost of a cup of coffee is the same. And we have different reasons. Our cup of coffee is expensive because the rent is too damn high. And so, 75% of your coffee is going to the small business's rent. There, it's going to these ridiculous taxes that have been put on the island. And then there's extreme austerity, and then they're slicing and dicing up the island and selling it to private, billionaires, and privatizing school systems and the power grid and the water system. I mean, everything is being privatized on the island. And it all really does tie back to two places, Boston and New York City in terms of Wall Street. But to add in another layer, the politicians in Puerto Rico are very connected with the politicians here in New York City. There are a few politicians in New York of Puerto Rican descent who are, work directly with some consultants who also represent the bondholders, and there's a very significant relationship. It also ties into the DNC. I don't think that Tom Perez would be, full circle here. He would be chair if it weren't for the Puerto Rican delegation, which undemocratically, and there's a big, hullabaloo right now about this in the DNC. The DNC members from Puerto Rico that existed before were ousted in a coup by these corporate DNC members who ended up getting Tom Perez the final vote. And so, statehood is actually a conservative issue. And so suddenly statehood was an official DNC position when it never was. It was never voted on. and was being pushed by these DNC members, many of whom are consultants who are partnered with Republicans and who represent Republicans. So, there's it's a tremendous tragedy. It's outrageous. It's disgusting. The governor of Puerto Rico is very close with an assemblyman here in New York who represents the Puerto Rican Day Parade. He's the chair of it. There's a lot of financial shenanigans that go on there. It's the largest ethnic parade in the city. It's a big moneymaker. And then they have weekend conferences. And one of the things I proposed, there's this very famous conference called Somos. And it happens in Puerto Rico and in Albany twice a year, one in each place. And this year, when they had it, all the public advocate candidates went down there, and they partied up. And I, as somebody who spent, much of my last year in Puerto Rico, it's not like I needed a trip to Puerto Rico. I boycotted it, and I sent out a press release saying that, if I'm elected public advocate within 4 months, I would like to have another conference in Puerto Rico where we invite lawmakers and we talk about disaster capitalism, and we bring union leaders and organizers and activists, because the one that exists now is a moneymaker, and some of the worst people in the world sponsor that conference.
Perfect. Disgusting, but perfect response. Okay, so just staying on the global just for one more second before we get to the tax answer, and then we'll let you go. But on top of that, and obviously this would be a really small part of the job, but there is an element where, New York just also has this global role because it's connected everywhere, and there's specific relationship to a place like Puerto Rico, but there's also just the platform and the reach. And, as you know, on this show, we're very concerned about and following what's happening in Brazil, among other places, but particularly Brazil, with both sort of seeing into the horizon of what the threat and catastrophe of what Bolsonaro and the fascism that he represents, supported by U.S. foreign policy, supported by the Wall Street Journal, supported by our corporate sector, and also the fact that, that a really important progressive leader who brought tens of millions out of poverty is in prison and was a president for 2 terms, is in prison on charges that everybody with any sort of objectivity around the issue thinks are incredibly questionable, or, in my case, I would say ridiculous, is a political prisoner. Obviously, I'm talking about President Lula. So to the extent that you also have a megaphone to talk about whether it be, Yemen or what might happen in the Eurozone, but in this case, obviously, Brazil, could you touch on that as well?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned this, and it's not. I guess it's direct. It's more of a pattern relationship. We had an event at the beginning of December with the former finance minister to Greece, Yanis Varoufakis.
Yep.
It was interesting because I know him. I know him through maybe for the past year and a half or so. And I was in Greece this summer, and we had a long conversation about what he's doing abroad. He has this party in Greece called the Meta Party, and he has the DM25 movement. And what the DM25 does in the EU is the goal is to have 25 members of parliament elected to the EU Parliament that are progressive, but it's really there to fight fascism, because we see this trend happening worldwide. And, he recognized it early. I think, he'd been in contact with Bernie before, but I had, helped him rebuild that relationship. And he was at the Sanders Institute right before our event. And I was at the Sanders Institute, and there was a panel in discussion with about the global rise of fascism. And I think, in a city like New York, which is just coming full circle, Yanis came to the event, and we talked about how New York could help fight fascism. Yep. And this was only a couple of weeks after you had the Proud Boys on the Upper East Side. It's the same way we treat it was very, the NYPD are actually involved in this, but how we have fascists literally on the streets, and we're just turning the other way in New York City, of all cities. So the conversation was, how do big cities unify in fighting fascism? Whether it's the way, I almost look at it from a perspective of, remember when the NYPD they started, I mean, they're the largest counterterrorism squad in the world, but they also have locations and partnerships with police forces all over the world. And that's for quote unquote terrorism, like the watch of terrorism. I think there should be some sort of global system like that for fascism, because fascism to me is terrorism. It may never be classified the same way, at least in the next few years, but I think that we need to have some sort of global infrastructure in terms of how to identify fascism, the rise of fascism in places. How do I identify, sleeper cells of Proud Boys and white supremacists, and how do you counter it effectively? Because, you're on the internet, you get this very well. I used to work at the Young Turks. Something crazy would happen when we'd watch our videos is it would suddenly go into these children's shows, and you're watching, because TYT had a younger audience. So you'd be watching like 3 or 4 videos, and the next suggested video would be like a teenage show. And then the teenage show would go into another young show, and then suddenly you're watching like young white supremacist shows.
Right.
And it's propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And they, and then it loops to Alex Jones or others.
Right.
And they're using, they're doing all they can to, especially with the young white men, the same way that actual, ISIS did, and it's not very different. I mean, this is the same strategy for years. This isn't a new concept. But I'm going off on a tangent. Bottom line is, I think that the New York City government, given its strength and its capacity and being a media hub here, we should be much more proactive in countering this early on. But respecting free speech, of course, because I'm very committed to that. But understanding, the same ammunition that we do against what the government thinks is terrorism, I think we should be a little bit more aware of the rise of fascist activities.
Absolutely. So tax the oligarchs, tax the corporations. Is that the answer to this?
Oh, yeah.
And also come see us on Thursday.
Come see us on Thursday. Tax the oligarchs, tax the corporations. Yes. Real estate developers, they have used every loophole. They've been deregulated for 35 years. I think we have a great opportunity now that the Senate is Democratic in New York. We need to keep the pressure on Democrats who may not vote progressive on every issue to make sure that the real estate industry is regulated so that we can do more here in the city, because the state controls so much, but now that we have Democrats, we should be in partnership with them. And then, one more thing that we're fighting for is we're fighting for a $30 minimum wage in New York.
Yep.
Municipal employees should definitely have a $30 minimum wage, and companies with over 75 employees should definitely be paying $30 an hour. I understand small businesses are concerned because the rent is very high. So, figuring out something that works for small business owners that's functional, totally understandable. But, this is, the city's empty. The lights are off in the city. People don't live in these apartments anymore. It's Russian oligarchs and Chinese oligarchs and you name an oligarch, and they're using our apartments as Cayman Islands. And when you know that the New York rich people are pissed off because their real estate's going up because of the oligarchs, you have a problem.
100%. Nomiki Konst, we will see you on Thursday. Also, just real quick, what's the website in case people, for whatever reason, can't make Thursday, but they want to just donate online?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, help us any way you can before the 11th. We are very, very close to hitting our matching funds. And then, we have another week if we don't hit it. But it's really, really important because this money will equal the playing field. So nomikikonst.com, there's a little donate button in the upper right-hand corner. You can follow me on Twitter, same, Nomiki Konst, and there's a button in my bio. And this is a big race. There are a lot of candidates. If you're wondering who to vote for, one thing I'll say that separates me from the pack, like I said, there's a lot of electeds who are progressive on many issues, but they still take the money from the bad guys. And if you really want to stand up to them, and if you really want to stand up to inequality in the city, you have to be willing to fight the people who are buying off our politicians.
100%. Nomiki, see you Thursday. Thanks a million.
Thanks, Michael. See you Thursday. See everybody else on Thursday.
See everybody on Thursday.
Very appreciative.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, folks. So we got
willing to go off on our favorite what's Tom Perez quote right off the bat.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit about you. I don't give a shit about you. They take money from real estate.
Don't give a shit. He's such a. I mean, it's like. Again, that was the one thing that the fucking troglodyte right wingers struck gold with. Cuck really works as a word, and like cuck Schumer. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, it's true. It's really true. And Tom Perez. I mean, my God, the just sort of awe-inspiring levels of cuckitude. And that whole. Do you remember like one of his pieces of spin was like, Keith Ellison's a congressman. He won't have time to be head of the DNC. That'll be my only job. I'm also going to do some courses at Brown. Could you imagine okay, first of all, actually Senator Chris Dodd was a member of the United States Senate and head of the DNC. So, it certainly can be done, but it kind of makes sense, right? Like, Keith Ellison is a Congress member and he's also the head of the DNC. That sort of fits versus like, I lecture at Brown and I'm also the head of one of the most ineffective political organizations in the history of the planet.
We have some friends of the show who are actually currently at Ivy League institutions, and this is not directed at any of them.
Yes.
But fuck the Ivy League.
Yeah, right. I'm sure they would agree, actually.
That's the Nixon energy that I want to keep into.
Those motherfuckers. Although, keep it at the Ivy League. Nixon was more like...
No, Nixon...
I didn't go to Yale, so a lot of Laotians are going to need to be burned
also the
alive.
blacks.
What?
Blacks and gays.
Blacks and gays, then the Jews. Not so into the Jews either. Okay, let's get to the Griscom. Let's do Griscom, and then we're going to give you a little update. And then, guys, we're taking a few-minute break, but we are going to publicly stream the Trump catastrophe, the Bernie response, and then also, of course, Dave Rubin, that vacant amorality has descended fully into moron fascism, that and a whole bunch more. But first, every time this happens, Richard Wolff takes note. The David Griscom Economic Minute. Or Economic Long Time.
Yeah,
because he never keeps it.
This sound is Richard Wolff's heart beating.
Yeah, this is sound. Yeah, this is Wolff's heartbeat goes BBC.
God, we need to get it back on.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second and sort of bring us all back to Greece and sort of check in on the situation there.
Yes.
Because as we all remember, there was obviously a huge economic crisis there, which was very much spurred by forced EU austerity. And, I was reading recently that Yanis Varoufakis' former party, Syriza, is now celebrating and heralding its recent $7.6 billion euro surplus for 2018, which represents 4% of GDP and overshot their forecast by 2.8 billion euros. The Greek finance minister, who was in the U.S. recently, was boasting that this is evidence that Greece should be regarded as an attractive place for investment, and that it has committed to further budget surpluses between 2018 and 2022. Now, as we all know, budget surpluses aren't necessarily good, especially if we're talking about a country that has an unemployment rate which is hovering around 20%. Right. And we're talking about people who have much of the austerity. The reason that they have budget surpluses is that we've seen pensioners have their income cut in half. We've seen massive layoffs in the public sector. And we've also just seen a real pilfering of not only of the public purse, but also of land and resources that were owned by the Greek government. Now, of course, the Greek working class has faced the brunt of austerity since the crisis. And, they're really suffering. I mean, people are very hungry. And now Tsipras, the prime minister and the leader of Syriza... Tsipras, yeah. Yes. Has promised to give back some of the money from the surplus. Mm-hmm. But since most people now need subsidies for heating in their houses, most of this, the surplus is going to go back and go into foreign markets. So it's not even be consumed domestically and spur the economy. So we can see, how much of a failure the forced austerity of the EU has been for the Greek economy, and really see the punishment that Greek people have felt. And, it's not looking good because a lot of economists are saying that it looks like 2019 is going to be a down year for the Eurozone, right, because even the hardworking Lutheran Germans are starting to have are starting to show signs of slowing in their economy, and that could be a very serious deficit for the entire Eurozone. And I just wanted to hit one more thing. Sadly, we saw last week the news of Bolsonaro We saw, the swearing in, and I just want to talk about a couple of the characters who are coming into power, especially that are going to affect the economic side of Brazil. Last week the Brazilian stock market hit new highs, which is definitely a symptom of the excitement of the financial class. Specifically, has been the promise of Bolsonaro to privatize large aspects of the Brazilian economy. And there's been a lot of Brazilian politicians who have been patiently waiting for their opportunity. Of the Novo Party, which translates to basically the new party, is preparing to work very closely with Bolsonaro to bring liberal economics to Brazil for the first time. The newly elected governor of Minas Gerais state has promised to bring these liberal economics to Brazil, and his party has grown significantly. Before they just had 4 city council members, and now they have 8 congressional seats. Another character from the Novo Party, or backer at least, Selim Matar, who's the founder of a car company called Localiza, which is actually one of the largest car rental companies in the world, is now going to be in charge of privatization in Brazil. So these are characters who have worked ridiculously hard for a long time, have been sort of waiting in the wings, who are now being brought in by Bolsonaro. And of course, we all know Paulo Guedes, who's now the economic czar, and he's a disciple of Milton Friedman, and he has promised to simplify taxes, privatize, free the economy, and decentralize.
And the Amazon has already been put in the hands of a former agribusiness person
who denies climate change.
And Bolsonaro has spoken regularly of his complete, active disregard and hostility to just indigenous people as people writ large.
Because they're Marxists.
SJWs. The Amazon tribes are SJWs. And this happens along, of course, with the gunning down of leaders of the landless movement. There's a guy whose name's escaping me at the moment, but there's a great piece in Brazil Wire, which, as I always say, is the indispensable resource on this stuff. And we'll talk about this more in the future, but Bolsonaro also, in addition to these, and of course a third of the cabinet is military and so on, but in addition to the usual predator sociopaths from the business class, and there will be, by the way, there's going to be an economic upturn in Brazil. So be prepared for that talking point. If you go in and do this amount of austerity and ripping off of state assets and suppression of workers and lowering of wages, because capitalism has bad incentive structure, the market's like that. So, one can overlook. If you hear those statistics, respond with the massive spikes in social crisis, like the return of hunger to Brazil, that's already been happening. But we'll go to this tweet in just one second. But the person I was going to say about, there's a philosopher in Virginia who is also a conspiracy theorist and astrologer, who has a lot of theories about cultural Marxism, who is also one of the main intellectual advisors to the Bolsonaro clique. So they, even in concert with the United States, have their own sort of like pseudo-intellectual, kind of like fake mystic conspiracy theory nonsense as well.
Can't wait till they have somebody in the Bolsonaro administration that's also a Quillette writer.
I'm surprised that hasn't already happened,
take bets
to be
on
honest.
that.
Yeah, I would. We should double check that. All right, this is dude, he wrote for Colette about why shouldn't there be free exchange of ideas about mass murdering indigenous people in the Amazon and turning their body into auto parts. This is a tweet from Benjamin Brandlow. He's a PhD candidate in Brown at the Watson Institute in sociology. He studies cities and democracy and Brazil concentration. First days of the Bolsonaro era are about giveaways to the financial and landed elite, no development project. Industrial elite hung out to dry. That is a really good point. That's a distinction. The Workers' Party definitely cultivated these sort of alliances with the industrial sector that could at least produce jobs. For how long can the electoral coalition that included sectors of the middle and lower classes be mobilized by cultural grievances alone? I actually would argue, as evidenced by the fact that, and this is a really depressing and devastating version of it applies, Lula would have won. There is a segment of voters that probably won't be very durable, but the difference here is that it's a double game plan to essentially at least return some type of quasi-military rule and complete violence and paramilitary suppression of social forces, as you already saw obviously several months ago in the assassination of Marielle Franco, the jailing of Lula. Sergio Moro, the disgusting fascist who put Lula in jail, who's now Bolsonaro's justice minister, has said that the next major area of corruption he's going to look at is labor unions. Yeah, I wonder why that would be. Along with Bolsonaro actively threatening to put Fernando Haddad and Dilma Rousseff and anybody in opposition in jail. He said literally, you can leave the country or go to jail, while his party's talked about introducing bills in parliament to ban protests. So, you're looking at a place, like, again, a realistic assessment in the United States. Of course, the United States has, this is a hard point to pull off, because on one hand, it certainly can happen here, and it's happened here many times. There is a homegrown authoritarian fascist politics in the United States. We exported fascism politics in some ways to Hitler's Germany, to apartheid South Africa. And at the same time, there are a lot more institutional circuit breakers on somebody like Trump. Brazil, you're talking about a place that, due to efforts of people like Lula, got democratized in the 80s, and democratized in a way that was favorable to labor, but actually, of course, allowed a predatory and corrupt military elite to keep a lot of their privileges, which is actually a main reason why there's all these structural problems in Brazil that led to fascism today. So there's a lot of points of resistance, and I think the coalition will actually fall apart pretty quickly. But these are also, violent thugs with the support of the global capitalist class. So it's going to take a lot of fighting on a lot of fronts. But as Lula said to his visual the other day, he said, as long as you don't give up hope, I won't give up hope. So we need to maintain that mentality and obviously continue being very active in our solidarity. Let's get to this. All right. A lot of people ask me what I think of Tulsi Gabbard. We're going to do a little bit of an update here. We're going to talk about Gabbard, Canada, and the court case with the temporary status for Haitians in the United States. But let's start with Tulsi Gabbard. So let me just say three quick things at the outset. One, I actually understand generically why people find her appealing. She's young. She has a totally different political profile. She has a really good environmental record. She supported Bernie Sanders. She's good on television. She's attractive. She's smart. These are all objective qualities that people, like. I mean, there's some qualities that she has that fit in the mode of why people would be interested in Obama or AOC or any other politician that seems to represent something new. I think obviously in AOC's case, she very significantly does. In Gabbard's case, it's a bit different. Now, there's another group of people that have arisen around her that respond to her in a cult-like way, and she can do no wrong. And, that's like the burn your bus bill. Well, maybe if you voted for fucking Tulsi Gabbard, we could have a revolution. I love Tulsi Gabbard. Did you see her in that bikini? And she was surfing, and everybody supports fucking corruption except for fucking Tulsi Gabbard. So maybe if you weren't smearing fucking Tulsi Gabbard, she could be the fucking president. So I'm going to set those people aside. And then I think there's other people who are actually pretty hip to the problems of Tulsi Gabbard. So I'm kind of speaking to the first group of people, and I want to just start by acknowledging that I understand, the obvious things that are to like about Tulsi Gabbard, like voting against PAYGO, supporting Bernie, opposing TPP, and so on. But I was not thrilled when I saw her say this to Chris Matthews yesterday, or a couple days ago, rather.
Our dad went to school on the GI Bill.
Yeah, so did I.
That's why we're middle class. Anyway, 2020, the Baskin-Robbins campaign. There's every kind of flavor running. Somebody from Hawaii was recently elected president. Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. Yourself, are you running?
I'm seriously considering it.
What would stop you?
I'm concerned about the direction of our country.
No, what would stop you from running?
I don't know. I'm thinking through
Sounds
very
like you're
carefully.
heading toward it.
I'm thinking
That's
through
an
it
old
very
Tim
carefully.
Russert question, by the way. What would stop you? You have to come up with that answer. It's good to have you. A lot of people are seeing you for the first time. U.S. Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard may run for president.
All right, what's the over and under that this just devolves to a Chris Matthews impression contest? Tulsi Gabbard! Raisins. Actually, he was enormously well behaved, I have to say, by his standards. Could very easily see him becoming why don't people vote for fucking Tulsi Gabbard? Jesus Christ, the pure, sheer human beauty. Do you remember when he got caught on tape, Hot Mike, talking about how hot Melania was?
Oh, I vaguely
He
remember
literally,
that.
it was amazing because he literally, it was
We
like,
need that.
it was like a, oh my God. This pure descent of the divine goddess.
Oh my God.
Thank you. Oh, Lord.
I had actually blotted that out.
You
of
know
my
how
memory.
George Harrison sang My Sweet Lord when he became a Hare Krishna? That's me when I see this Melania. Oh, Hare Krishna. My sweet Lord. Okay. But there's a very specific set of problems with Tulsi Gabbard. And I actually find it's kind of unbelievable that a contingent of people that pride themselves, and maybe if it just is an anti-war position, it makes sense, I guess. If your position is simply of opposing U.S. intervention abroad, although Tulsi Gabbard supported President Obama's drone program, which I would think any one of us, whether we have an anti-war position or a left anti-imperialist position, would be a strong, relentless, robust critic of the horrific Obama administration drone program that killed many civilians in Pakistan and Yemen, and of course has expanded and mushroomed and killed far more people under the authoritarian, murderous leadership of Donald Trump. That's starting. Go ahead. Do you have that quote?
Yeah, this is from the Jacobin article, Tulsi Gabbard is not your friend. It says, responding to a question, Gabbard said that there's a place for the use of this technology as well as smaller quick strike special forces teams versus tens, if not hundreds of thousands of soldiers occupying space within a country. So basically she I'm sort of, concerned, but this stuff has a place. Basically the Obama line.
She has an Obama. So here's the thing. Tulsi Gabbard had an Obama position on drones. Back during when she kind of came on a certain type of national radar, say in 2013, 2014, it was on the right. It was being on Fox News saying that it was a problem that Obama didn't use the phrase Islamic terrorism. This is how she caught the interest of Steve Bannon and Breitbart and the fascists. Then, and that also correlated with some really just wrong and immoral votes on Syrian refugees, which are serious, and anybody who made those votes needs to be held accountable. Then it morphed into this, again, an anti-war position, quote unquote, that turned into what seemed like a complete support for Assad. I know there's some people that maintain a fantasy life about the nature of Assad. I strongly oppose U.S. action in Syria. I absolutely see what the United States and the Gulf allies have done in Syria in terms of killing civilians, in terms of funding some terrorist groups. But the reality is that Assad and his patrons have killed an enormous amount of civilians as well, and he presided over a lot of atrocities. So how a position that is right in many respects on Syria morphs into a one-dimensional one that negates very important and legitimate resistance to Assad and doesn't have much to say about the real breakthrough in the Kurdish areas is a major problem, right? Also, of course, nothing to say about Netanyahu, nothing to say about Israeli apartheid. And the context for understanding this, and we're going to have the author of this piece on the show soon, is Tulsi Gabbard's rising star despite her support for Hindu nationalists. It's in a piece in The Intercept. And the way to understand Tulsi Gabbard, and I've said this before, look, I totally will carve more space for somebody coming, from a Hindu background, frankly. It's not represented in American politics in the same way, obviously. And there certainly is still a lot of conspiracy theories and bigotry and just kind of fantasies about people who, frankly, maybe are Hindu or Buddhist or Taoist or Muslim or whatever. Okay, I get that. But the reality is just like there's people who align with the far-right fascist elements in a place like Israel, she has been in her career aligned with the Hindu nationalist far-right, and specifically Narendra Modi, who's India's prime minister, who was in the most gentle scenario, complicit when he was governor in Gujarat in not stopping a horrific murderous spree that took thousands of Muslims' lives and Christians' lives in the span of about a couple of days when he was head of Gujarat. I'm going to quote now from this piece that we have up on screen, and I'm going to have the author of this piece on soon. Long before Indian strongman Narendra Modi became the prime minister of the world's largest democracy, he was a prominent leader of the Hindu right. He rose as a prominent figure through the nationalist organization Rasastastra Swamayevsk Sangh, or RSS, I know I mispronounced that, whose ideology includes a desire to carve out a Hindu nation in which Muslims and Christians are considered second class. It was well-known activists who once had links to RSS who assassinated Mahatma Gandhi, accusing him of appeasing Muslims during the bloody partition of the Indian subcontinent. Goes on to, in 2002, when Modi was chief minister of the state of Gujarat, he oversaw an outbreak of violence by Hindu nationalists against the minority Muslim population that resulted in the deaths of more than 1,000 people. Local and international fact-finding groups accused Modi of complicity in the crimes. Now, she, of course, notes that he's part of this broader class of people like Duterte, Erdogan, Bolsonaro, and, of course, Trump. And she goes on to say, Gabbard, but she has also become a polarizing figure. This is speaking of Gabbard. Her progressive domestic record is at odds with her support for authoritarians abroad, including Modi, Sisi, and Syria's Bashar al-Assad. As right-wing nationalism rises across the globe, it's beginning to be recognized as an existential threat to a world order rooted in liberal democratic values. Now, I have some critique of that line, but I certainly, I don't want to regress. I want to get better than those liberal democratic values. And Gabbard, an Iraq War veteran, is now being pushed to choose sides. She did not respond to The Intercept's multiple requests for the interview. For comment, Gabbard was embraced early on by pro-Modi elements of the Hindu-American diaspora in the United States, who have donated generously to her campaign. But as she flirts with the idea of running for president, she's cut ties with the fervent supporters on at least one occasion while continuing to court them in private. So this is the problem with her. And I also want to stipulate, I mean, I've made it pretty clear. I'm going to follow the same path, the only obvious path of who to vote for in a 2020 election, which is like, look, if you live in New York, you can protest, you can do whatever the fuck you want. If you live in a competitive state, I would advise voting for whoever the Democratic nominee is. And that certainly includes Tulsi Gabbard, 100%. But this is not somebody, unfortunately, that we can just embrace in a progressive left crusade, particularly if you have any type of actually realized international and global outlook. Maybe she'll get better, but the record so far is profoundly troubling, discordant with a fight for a pluralistic, democratic, and open world. And that's a fundamental problem that unfortunately she represents. I wish it were another way. This is happening in Canada right now. We're going to play this clip from Democracy Now! There's a pipeline that the Canadian government of the highly woke Chewbacca sock-clad Justin Trudeau is pushing forward. You know that he's obviously extremely sensitive to the needs of people, at least when it comes to trivial nonsense like, language and tone. But when it comes to actual things like a native population that has already been in every type of way oppressed, this is the type of thing that you still see in today's day and age in Canada. This is a report from Democracy Now! We're going to just check in on this.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
In Canada, armed forces raided native Wet'suwet'en territory in British Columbia Monday, with at least 14 arrests being reported. Land defenders faced off with Royal Canadian Mounted Police as the officers breached 2 checkpoints set up to keep pipeline workers out of protected territory. Indigenous leaders are reportedly being blocked from their territory.
The Wet'suwet'en have won rights and title to their lands. We did not hurt anyone. The hereditary chiefs say no. You cannot go through our lands, and under your law, the authority is them.
TransCanada Corporation has been seeking entry into Indigenous territory where they're planning to build the massive $4.7 billion Coastal GasLink pipeline. Land protectors from First Nations clans set up 2 encampments where they'd been physically blocking entry to TransCanada workers. This is a protest.
We will continue monitoring that. And as Julian Brave Noisecat in Illicit History on, for Patrons talked about, the very practical reasons why, obviously, indigenous populations are at the forefront of global ecology and justice movements. The last thing I want to touch on, there's a lawsuit that just started being heard today in Brooklyn. The Trump administration and one of its, I don't want to say smaller, but one of the types of, in its sort of deluge of horrors that come out of this grotesque, disgusting administration, their assault on the Haitian community in the United States might have escaped your attention because it was an afternoon story and the avalanche of crimes coming and hideousness coming from these people. But I'm quoting now from The Gothamist. Attorneys representing a group of Haitian plaintiffs argued that the Trump administration was motivated by racism and a political agenda more than actual evidence when it decided to end temporary protected status for tens of thousands of Haitian immigrants. The program known as TPS has allowed Haitians to remain in the U.S. since a devastating 2010 earthquake. Opening remarks were made in a federal court in Brooklyn today before Judge William F. Kuntz, who was appointed by President Obama in 2011. The lawsuit is one of several moving through the courts that challenged the Trump administration's decision to end TPS for hundreds of thousands of immigrants, including 59,000 Haitians. TPS is designated for nationals coming from countries hit by civil war and national disasters. In October, a judge in San Francisco temporarily blocked the administration's actions, citing the president's remarks denigrating immigrants. Now, of course, this goes back to the infamous people from shithole countries remark that this fucking bloated trust fund baby who has never accomplished anything other than like effective Twitter burns in his life, who somehow through the sort of collective failings of everything from capitalism to patriarchy has become president, had to say about people who work their fucking asses off here and they don't need to justify it. Everybody, even if you're not here working your ass, there's more than enough space to support somebody fleeing a disaster like the Haitian earthquake. But that being said, particularly if you live in a place like Brooklyn, you see people and you interact with people from different communities and you see what that actually looks like. Not even in terms of some like liberal, like look at all the great things that come with it. And plenty of great things do come with it. But just the sort of day in and day out reality of people who work harder, have more to offer, and are better people than anything represented remotely by this grotesque president and this grotesque band of just the worst assortment of subhumans imaginable in this administration. So we will continue to follow that case. It's a really important one. Of course, it fits into the broader effort to re-engineer the electorate through ethnically cleansing white nationalist project of Trump and the Republican Party. And it's also a good reminder in a couple minutes before we go to this jackass's statement at 9 that we will make fun of, and I am almost certain to bring up some old Ivanka material around. As many people have pointed out, the only problem with Rashida Talib's comments was it should be daughter fucker, not motherfucker, because he wants to fuck his daughter. So we're going to get to that. We'll talk about the dumb fuck statement. And we have sound, of course, from another dumb fuck, Dave Rubin. We're going to touch on another dumb fuck. Well, actually, Erdogan is an evil fuck. He's not a dumb fuck. He's actually a smart evil fuck. His column in the New York Times, we're going to touch on that. We have to talk about this just ridiculous treatment of a great hero, Angela Davis. And we're also, for palate cleanser, Bernie is going to be giving a response to this. So we'll also be tapping in with, an actual quality leader with Bernie Sanders.
And it's all public, folks.
And it's all public. You all can
The
fucking
public
watch
option.
it. The public TMBS option. So, first and foremost, become a fucking patron if
Thank
you
you,
haven't
guys.
yet. It's time. Thanks all of you who've done it. Thank you, new patrons, the people who've joined so far tonight. We continue to grow and grow. And and definitely go to our PayPal link in the description. Hit us up on PayPal so we can continue doing YouTube as we figure out what the hell is going on with YouTube's nonsense and not monetizing us. And go get your tickets to the Bell House. We'll see you February 1st. I'm incredibly excited. It's going to be a really fun show. Thursday, come support Nomiki. She needs to be New York City public advocate. Thanks to each and every one of you. Thank you to Matt. Thank you to David. Thank you to David. Become a patron today. This Sunday, illicit history of Hugo Chavez and the pink tide with Hugo Chavez's former attorney, Eva Gollinger. We're talking about the state of the Bolivarian Revolution.